So, welcome to the latest episode of MQ's Open Mind podcast. This afternoon, I'm delighted we've got a fantastic guest. We've got Dean Stott, and Dean is founder of DLC Anxiety, which is an online anxiety support community. Welcome to the podcast, Dean. And before you do your welcome back, and also author of 3 books, which we'll be talking about, no doubt, during our conversation. So, welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys asking me to come on and have this conversation.
Fantastic. So, but maybe just to kick us off then, Dean, can you tell us, obviously, what sort of sparked your interest, or where did your interest in mental health come from?
Yeah, of course. So I initially did a psychology degree back a long time ago now, back in the day. So I've always had an interest in the mind and the psyche. However, it was in 2017, my father passed away. And like most people do, I ended up going back to work way before any grief had been processed. And I just randomly started to have panic attacks. And this was the first time I'd experienced panic attacks. And yeah, it took me by surprise, and it took me on a 2-year journey of overcoming the panic disorder. After overcoming it, it became my mission to let other people know they're not alone, they're not isolated, that you can overcome panic disorder. Because when you're in a panic disorder, you think that's it. You think you're isolated. You think you're alone. You think there's never going to be a day where you don't wake up and you don't feel anxious. So I just wanted to spark that into as many people as possible. And I went on a search of trying to find the best platform to spread the message. And that's where Instagram came up at the time. A few lockdowns happened and it was almost a dominoes effect. And now 4 years later, 1.3 million community members. And yeah, we're definitely getting the message out.
I mean, it's incredible. I was looking at your Instagram earlier. So yeah, so you went from 0
yes
to over 1 million in 4 years.
Initially, I was getting my message out. People was resonating, great engagement. People obviously finding hope that someone had been through it. They overcome a panic disorder and they were sharing it. So I definitely had the engagement at the start. But as soon as the lockdowns came in, it was almost like all the celebrities. So we have a lot of celebrities who follow the community over in America. It's almost like they all got the phones back and were dedicated to the mental health space. So they all started sharing a lot of the posts and a lot of the interviews I did on the platform. And then it was like a dominoes effect from the start of the lockdown. Maybe I was on maybe 200,000 followers. Then a year later, 1 million, and now it just keeps growing, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it is. It's remarkable. Can I just bring you back a second though to before we get to, or we'll go back to DLC Anxiety, but in your own challenges with anxiety after your father died, so did you get treatment or support, or how did you manage that?
Yeah, no, great question. So yeah, I started having panic attacks in the workplace. Obviously didn't know it was a panic attack at the time. So my first protocol was the doctor. Mm-hmm. I went to the doctor. They ran the relevant blood tests. They reassured me it was anxiety, but because I'd never felt this level of anxiety before, and I obviously had an anxious mind turned on, I thought that it wasn't anxiety. I thought something would be coming back from the blood test, that something would be seriously wrong. And I remember the blood test came back fine, and the doctor prescribed me a library book. And at the time, I thought they were dismissing me completely. I thought they wasn't taking my situation seriously, until I actually went to the library and got this book on psychoeducation on anxiety and panic. And then I really realized, when you start to learn the process of anxiety, you start to take away some of that scary uncertainty, then that really helped me and kickstarted my recovery. So I did that. And the doctor also put me in contact with a counselor regarding the grief. Mm-hmm. So the grief was dealt with separately to the anxiety. With the anxiety, I did self-help CBT, which I found very helpful. And like I said, it was just a learning process and the psychoeducation around anxiety, which really kick-started it. And I opened up to a friend in the workplace that I was in at the time, who told me that he'd been through an anxiety disorder. And it was almost like he was telling me, it was almost like he was walking in my shoes. Like everything he would say back to me, it was like a breath of fresh air. It was like a weight off my shoulder. And that moment with him as well also sparked this message of you're not alone, you're not isolated, and most importantly, you're not broken.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and it's so that period of recovery. How long did that take then?
2 years from where I could say that I was. And again, another conversation, anxiety recovery. It's not never to feel anxious again. It's to continue to do the things that non-anxious you would do. To go out and not care if you have a panic attack. And guess what? The knock-on effect is with that mindset, the panic attacks, they lessen. And then over time, they just didn't start. I wasn't, there wasn't frequently occurring.
Mm-hmm.
So that process, I would say, to get to that point was 2 years. But there was, as you know, with anxiety recovery, there was ups and downs. There was great moments, and then there was setbacks. But that was all part of the journey.
And so, what are you doing at the minute then to maintain your mental health then, or how do you maintain your mental health now? I assume part of it is doing what you say in your books, but we'll come back to that. But in terms of your everyday life, what do you do?
So anxiety and stress highly linked. So I realized that when I go through maybe between 1 and 3 months of high levels of stress, that'll eventually pour out into excessive anxiety. So now I'm really mindful to keep that stress level down. The external stresses, the ones that I have control of, to really keep them down. So I do that by meditation, mindfulness, and exercise. Exercise is really, really important for me, and that really, really helps lower the stress level, which then manages the anxiety levels.
Obviously, good advice for everybody, or anybody, I suppose, to maintain your mental health. So you started. So 4 years ago, then you started DLC. So whatever that is,
2018,
2019. Was your first book then Untangle Your Anxiety? Is that the first book you did with?
Yeah, so the first book was Untangle Your Anxiety. So a Manchester therapist came to me with the idea. He'd been through an anxiety disorder and was helping people through therapy. And he came with the idea, he'd done a few books before with let's get the story of two people who've been through an anxiety disorder come out the other side, because he believed that people would resonate with it, which they did. It came out at the ideal time in the middle of lockdown, and we had great success from that book. Greater Than Panic was the second one, which was my recovery story. And that literally takes you from day one to the end of that 4-year period where I overcome the anxiety. It shows not only the tools that I used, it shows the science behind the tools. Mm-hmm. And it's an interactive book as well, because I know that people with anxiety, some people find it hard to sit down and read a book. So there's lots of QR codes in there that shows you videos and things. So it just breaks it up. It was made for an anxious mind.
Excellent. And then the third, so we just finished your trilogy then?
Yeah. So the third book, Chloe, I went through a period of between 3 and 6 months of all the messages that the community was sending me, all the messages. We collated them. I've got a team of people who collated all those messages, and we created a fictional story of answering them questions of what people was asking. Yeah. So it was a fictional story of someone going through an anxiety disorder, based off true events, and again, that's had a wonderful reception, and all 3 best-selling in the categories on Amazon. So yeah, a dream come true, really.
Yeah, no, and obviously helping a lot of people, which is fantastic. And so in terms of the community, then, so the DLC anxiety community. So tell us how that works. And so because when I was looking on it, you seem to do lots of different things on the community. Yes. For those of our listeners who haven't heard or used to look at the community, can you tell us a bit about what you do?
Yeah, of course. So it's an online community. Firstly, we share psychoeducation, which is vetted through psychotherapists, and to make sure, obviously, everything is correct, which is really important. I think the ethics behind anything when you're speaking about mental health is really important. So we have an online community where people they share tips, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and then we get professionals from all around the world. I interview them on the platform, and just almost just as a sponge, take in as much knowledge. We put the questions of the community to these professionals, and it's just creating an open space for people to speak about mental health. We've had a lot of celebrities interviewed on the platform as well. Because they want to share their stories. So we have some wonderful celebrities who are sharing their personal stories to their large followings, which is only a good thing.
And so who gives a couple of examples of celebrities who've shared their stories?
Yeah, so we've had Dr. Amen, who's a celebrity doctor over in America. He's done work with Justin Bieber, Miley Cyrus, Dr. Julie as well, who's over here in the UK. You may be familiar with her. MD Motivator, he's an influencer who's really blown up over in America. Lots of different psychotherapists, psychologists, actors, actresses, musicians. We've literally had it all, and it's beautiful to see the different people coming on to want to tell their own journey, because everyone's got their own journey.
Yeah, of course. And so is it? I'm just curious how you get these people. These people obviously are signed up to your platform, to Instagram, and then you just contact them and see.
Oh, vice versa. Some of them. Yeah. I think again, it's a knock-on effect. Initially, I was contacting them and saying, "Do you want to come onto the platform? I want to give you this space where we can have a conversation and openly talk about anxiety and mental health." And then over the years, people were then contacting to come on. So yeah, a bit of both.
And you also do your own podcast, isn't that right?
Yeah, so it's called DLC Live. So the live interviews that we do on Instagram, they're converted to podcasts for people who want to listen to it and don't have time to watch, or want to listen to it in the bath, or wherever they watch the listen to the podcast.
You've got it all covered, Dean. So yeah. So no, I was really pleased to hear, obviously, that everything you do is you mentioned there, the ethics of it.
Yes,
is ensuring that it's sort of evidence informed, and you're obviously working with therapists or whoever it is. So I think that's fantastic. But think about so one of the things we always ask, we're always keen to sort of explore in our podcast, is get different people's views on what we should be doing in terms of research in the field. And so with your vast experience, perhaps not as a researcher, but obviously as this educator, communicator, reaching so many people. And if we were saying, right, here's a couple of £1 million, what would you think the research community, what would you say your priority would be for, or priorities for research in anxiety?
Just to develop more techniques for people to use, to develop more strategies, to look into reasons why, for example, SSRIs work for some people but don't work for others, to really pour the money into research that's funded by the right people. So it's not, if you're looking at medication, it's not funded by the pharmaceuticals, for example. For non-biased research into the best techniques and tools that we can use to help as many people as possible. And I'm also a international ambassador for a bullying charity over in America. And that's something that's really close to my heart, because psychoeducation, CBT tools, all that can be learned at an early age. And we're just not doing enough to teach children, firstly, about anxiety, and secondly, how to manage it, what techniques and tips we can do. And it's a passion of mine to get that into schools as early as possible. So yeah, I would use the research to get it to the kids and get them educated.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think, especially no matter what way we look at the evidence now, it's very clear that the mental health of young people has deteriorated. It's got worse, certainly, over recent years. And I think the more we can do earlier, I think you're absolutely right, is the better. And that, and I think we are moving in the right direction, but I think there's still a long way to go. And especially given we know that, depending which statistic you look at, the majority of mental health problems happens before you're 20 or your early 20s, and often obviously in your teens. So it is really, really important that we can do more there. So just thinking and relating sort of research to the online community stuff. And you said that with the Chloe book, if I understood correctly, you've used sort of examples of what people have told you on the community about examples of anxiety or situations and so on. But similarly, then the opposite of research are myths. So I'm just curious to see, have you any sense from reading, engaging with vast numbers of people, what are the sort of common myths that you're still hearing or seeing or reading online around anxiety or mental health more generally?
I would say they're always around marketing, unfortunately. So we know that with any mental health issue, that there's going to be some bad actors in the space that try and prey on financially. So it would be miracle cures, to cure anxiety and things like that. So I'm more than happy for someone to come on and share their experience on the community about it, even if I disagree with it. That's a really important thing to me. I'm more than happy to have the discussion, but I want to listen to the scientific evidence. I want to see the research behind this. And I hate the word anxiety cure. Because anxiety is an emotion. Do you know what I mean? Nothing needs to be cured. It's just happening in a disorderly fashion.
And so then is there a way in which you try to moderate those bad actors who come on, or like, so do you do some sort of moderation, or I don't think censorship's the right word, but how do you work with that if people are putting up information you think actually that's completely wrong?
Yeah, so they can't put information actually in the community. So the community posts, they are all made from ourselves. Again, the vetted psychologists and psychotherapists. So if somebody wants to come on, if we just give an example, somebody wants to come on and talk about CBD and its effects on helping anxiety. Well, I know that enough scientific research hasn't been done on this. And I would make my view clear if I'm interviewing that person. But I think it's important for me to give that person their opportunity, especially if it's a personal opportunity, to say that it's helped them, because I don't like dismissing someone who's got this tool and it works for them, just because who am I to tell them that it doesn't work for them? I can look at the scientific evidence, which we do, and say, well, if that works for you, great. Well, we need to do more research into this. But I'll never dismiss someone or their experience. Yeah,
actually, just the way you said that, I was in New York last week, and I just turned on the TV and Dr. Phil was on. But the feature they were doing on was, what was it, the benefits of cannabis or marijuana for mental health, as it happens. But actually I thought he dealt with it really well, because he, as often is the case, I think, in Dr. Phil, he tries to get the competing views on, and obviously he himself has very strong views. And so one lady came on and she was talking about, she was an advocate, and it started off, it might even be for mothers, a cannabis for moms or something, I think was the whole thing. But anyways, so he respected her view, and then somebody came on completely opposite view, and then they had a scientist on as well. But it was pretty good, I thought, because similar to, I think, what you're doing is giving everybody some sense of airing of their views. You get some, because we are all obviously entitled to our own views, but then he was pretty clear in clarifying what the evidence says, that there's dangers, and if you do this, it's problematic, and that's problematic. So I think it's important, as long as that it's done in a more measured, in a contextualized way, where the risks are communicated. But anyway, it just came to mind. Sorry, it was a slight tangent.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more with that.
So given the success then of the community, then, so what are the downsides? Because obviously in social media, I'm not an advocate of social media all bad. Recognizing, like anything, there's positive and negative components. So in your experience, so obviously lots of positivity in terms of you're reaching that many people, helping a lot of people. What are the downsides then, or the challenges?
Well, we know social media is bad for mental health. However, it's addictive, and the generations are not going to be not using social media. So I thought it was important to have this side of social media, a community feel. And it really, really is a community feel, a safe space on social media where people can go and speak. And learn from professionals and converse with people going through similar situations, because everyone's on an anxiety recovery journey. Someone might be at the start, someone might be in the middle or at the end, but they all have stories to tell. Regarding myself, what the downsides are, it would be that I am constantly on my phone 24/7. I work obviously with all different time zones, so I can be working. For example, I'm doing an interview 9 p.m. tonight. So again, it's not your regular 8 till 5, but when you realize it's something that you're really passionate about, something where you've been through it, and you know that by giving the hope, the messages have been incredible over the years of people saying that literally they found the community, and that's the reason why they're still alive, because it gave them hope. Now, when you read that in the morning, after a bad night's sleep, that really gives you the motivation to carry on and continue what you're doing.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. So we touched on your book. So then, was this doing the book? I know you said obviously the psychotherapist approached you. But how did you find the process of writing the books? Had you done any writing before?
I'd never written a book before, so it was all new to me. I found it very therapeutic, to be honest. I think writing is a great mindfulness technique, and I'm a big advocate of being in the moment, being present. And I think writing and reading is really helpful for that. So I found it therapeutic for myself. And if someone wants to get into a hobby of writing, I think it's only good for their mental health.
Yeah, so in terms of the process, then did you just write? Because I read a couple of books myself, one co-authored and one not, and they're very different experiences writing a co-authored book versus a single-authored book. So how did you find, or how did you balance that in the?
I think with the experience of the other author, it was really helpful, useful, and what was great, I don't know if you've looked at the book, but at the end of each chapter, it was almost like two people chatting in a pub. This relaxed feel, and giving a summary of that chapter, and almost speaking as two males would. Again, this two males who've been through an anxiety disorder sharing their story. I think that's why it resonated so much. So the process, I found it very, very easy, and I really, really enjoyed the process.
I mean, that's the wrong answer in many ways, though. It's many people talk about the slog of writing a book, but no, I'm jesting. I think that's great that it came easily, and obviously it's had so much reach. So what do you think? So what's the plan next then? So next step, continue to grow the community, or
so we're always growing the community each day. I do a lot of talks, so going to schools. I went to Amazon head office in London in December to speak to the workers there about mental health, my journey, my story. Doing a lot of that over here and abroad. And like I say, continuing the interviewing with people. There may be another book coming. You did ask, how do I find the process with a co-author? I think the process individually is more stressful personally, but maybe that's just because it's something that's new to me. So I definitely think it's harder when you do it on your own. But I do think there's another story there. So what
might that other story be? Not that you want to give much away.
No, so the other story may be to do with the humps and bumps in the road of anxiety recovery, and how when you've overcome an anxiety recovery, how if you look at the evidence, the scientific evidence is that you're more likely to develop anxiety again, and exploring that area, and what can we do if someone does relapse? What does that mean? Does it mean that you're back to square one, or does it mean that you're more equipped now, you've got all the techniques and tools, and you've already overcome an anxiety disorder? So looking at setbacks, because I think that's important to discuss.
No, I think that's so true. And actually related to that then, maybe some pieces of advice if you're supporting somebody or friends or living with somebody who has anxiety. Well, what would your tips be for what's the best sort of support you can provide or they can provide?
Yeah, we get that question a lot in the community. How can I help a loved one? How can I help a family member? And first thing I say is realize that when that person who's going through that anxiety, they've Googled everything, they've searched every miracle cure they can. because it becomes a fixation of overcoming the anxiety. They don't want to feel like that. It's horrible when you're dealing with anxiety for most of the day, or you're dealing with high levels of anxiety with panic attacks. So my advice is to be supportive with them. Maybe share psychoeducation together. Look at the latest scientific evidence of things that work. Read into why physical sensations happen. Read into recovery stories, how people have recovered. And also just ask, just say, I'm here for you if you want to speak about it. If you want someone to go for a walk, again, a top tip is get moving. And it doesn't have to be going to the gym 6 days a week. But if you get moving, there really is science in a walk clears the mind. And those endorphins can really help when you're dealing with anxiety to reduce that stress.
Yeah, I love the clarity of thought. You've answered that question many times before, I can tell. I can tell.
Yeah, I just wanted to pivot a little bit. So being a man in the mental health space, how do we try to reduce some of the stigmas that men have with mental health?
It's a great question. And it's something that probably still upsets me to this day. So if I look at my demographics on Instagram, for example, so we've got 1.2 million people in the community. 85% of them people are women. Again, if you look at all statistics to do with mental health, we know that doesn't mean that 85% of women are more likely to deal with mental health. We know that men are more likely to develop mental health issues. So I think bridging that gap is really important. How we do it is by men speaking up, openly speaking about their anxiety journeys, having medical professionals in the field who are males, and advocating that, there is no stigma anymore. Obviously, there was a lot of stigma when it came to men, but we're not in that. I do feel like the society is moving forward for men to share their experiences with mental health and it not to be seen weak. I definitely do see improvements in that area. I just love to see more men join in the community, because over the 4 years, that figure's pretty much stayed the same, which is roughly around 80 to 85% women.
Yeah, I agree that we're moving in the right direction, but I still think we have a long way to go, and that sadly I think that there is still stigma associated with men talking about their mental health. And it's not even just the stigma, it's just I think that we need to continue to think about what masculinity means and what it is to be a man in modern society. And I think they're making good progress, but yeah, still some distance. And especially when you look at then different demographics within that, people from different backgrounds and different areas. I think you've lots of challenges, but I think doing what you're doing, I think, is fantastic, and trying to attract that. I will join the community tomorrow.
Fantastic.
One more. And
Craig, one more male for the cause.
Well, Craig, you as well. Are you not going to join, Craig?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I'm already in it.
Okay. So Craig is one of the 15% or whatever.
Yeah. I was just going to ask you, do you think that men are more likely to turn to substance abuse to mask the anxiety instead of dealing with it head on?
There's some evidence out there certainly suggesting that men are much more likely to use avoiding coping strategies, perhaps is one way of describing it, but certainly, the relationship with alcohol and drugs to mask pain or around help seeking. There's definitely some evidence out there for that, but it's always much more complicated than simply that. That's part of it, certainly, but I think for me, other bits include the issue that if we look at our mental health services, the question I always ask is, to what extent have they been designed for men in mind? And I think we need to rethink that. And there have been some changes, so that there's been great developments looking at mental health support in football clubs, in rugby clubs, and cricket clubs, and so on. I think that's great, because it's about a case of going, instead of the expectation of it being the man comes to this clinical service, it's you go to where men are. And then also try and reframe it that it's not just all about clinical services and depression and anxiety and so on. It's about trying to regulate how you feel. And there's a whole different language you can use, and talking about stress and response to stress and so on. So I think that's where, when I talk about the long way to go, it's things like that I think we need to do, so that men are less likely to turn to drugs or alcohol. But as I say, it's not just one or the other. But I think that was a great question, though, Dean. Back to you. Okay, so time is almost, we're almost at the end. And then, Craig, anything else? Or Dean even, given Dean started to ask questions as well.
I was going to ask your opinion on SSRIs. I know a lot of people don't like to speak about the topic, but obviously a man with so much wisdom, I think it would only be right for me to ask you the question. Do you think they're helpful? Do you see them as a crutch? And do you believe that if someone has a good response to them, that it's good to reduce anxiety, to then help them with more effective techniques such as CBT or exposure therapy because the anxiety levels come down?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you, though, Dean. So the SSRI debate, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I don't prescribe medications. So I would always defer to the evidence base. And so what the evidence, you would look at what does the evidence say for the treatment of anxiety and or depression. And obviously there is certainly evidence for the effectiveness of SSRIs for some conditions, but like everything, there's no one size fits all. And so CBT works. There's obviously evidence, of course, for the effectiveness of talking therapies in different forms. So my advice would always be, if you're having difficulties with anxiety, of course, and you find it difficult to manage it yourself, speak to your GP, and your GP then can advise what the best course is. Because what's absolutely clear is there's no one size fits all. And again, you mentioned when you go back, if we go back to the very start of the podcast, when you were talking, Dean, about your own experiences of recovering, and it was about non-pharmacological interventions, looking at exercise, looking at whatever other ways of support. Sleep is so important. Yeah. So my advice is always, if you are struggling with your mental health, speak to your GP, and your GP and that will then can advise on the best sort of course of action for you.
And I think it's good that we have all these different, do you know what I mean? Anxiety is a very treatable condition. We have so many different, like you said, sleep, nutrition, exercise, CBT, exposure therapy, medication. There's all these different things you can do. And I think getting that message out there as well to the people who are dealing with panic attacks and maybe ending up in A&E because they're fearful of something seriously is wrong. Getting that message to the people that there is hope and there's many ways of treating it. We always say in the community, if you're getting any anxiety symptoms and it's interfering with your day-to-day living, the first port of call is definitely your doctor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So we're on the same page in that one. Yeah. Okay, so just as we try and sort of end our conversation, so we try and end with a couple of sort of less necessarily mental health focused questions. The first one, Dean, is what advice would you give your 16-year-old self?
Probably to be present within the moment. I think at 16, you're planning ahead. You're planning what's your career going to look like. You're planning, maybe I'm going to be moving out of my house at the time. Yep. Have I got a girlfriend or how's my love life, my relationships? You're planning all these things. And I think at 16, you're not living in the moment. So that would definitely be my advice, is live in the moment and enjoy being 16.
Yeah, enjoy being 16. Did I enjoy being 16? I don't know. Yeah, try to enjoy it, certainly, because I think those adolescent years are tricky. Craig, did you enjoy your 16s?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
I think you've told me this before. You didn't enjoy it.
The thought of going back to being 16 just fills me with dread, but it's behind me now.
That's to say, well, unless ChatGPT tells us otherwise, I don't think you're going to go backwards, Craig. You're only going forward.
Fingers crossed.
And then the last question, Dean, is again thinking about you're obviously meeting lots of people in these online communities, but thinking about are there two people or one or two people, living or dead, who you'd love to have a coffee with or dinner with?
One springs to mind just with my interest in psychology. I think he's a national treasure, Derren Brown, the illusionist, but it's much more than the illusion. I mean, I've read all his books. He's into so much stoicism, for example, which I'm a big believer in. I would love to sit down with him. I'd love to get him on the community and do an interview with him. I think he has so much knowledge in the field of psychology and with mental health conditions as well. So he would be my number one person. And
that's a great suggestion. I just listened to. Have you heard his? He was interviewed on the Diary of a CEO podcast.
Yes.
That was a great interview, actually. Watched it on a plane there recently. Really, really good, actually. Yeah. And who's your second person? Have you got a second?
I think I would do. I think just the one, to be honest, because that hasn't changed since the age of probably 16 when I was introduced to him. I was just captivated, and then reading more about his vast amount of knowledge to do with psychology and mental health. He would be my number one.
I haven't read his books, but obviously I've followed his work. And then in the interview, and I've listened to a couple of interviews recently, and and I didn't quite realize his journey he was on in terms of his Christianity stuff, and then how he found hypnosis at university, and then how his journey and then coming out and stuff, and his journey since that is really a remarkable individual. So he is. Okay, well, on behalf of Craig and I, Dean, thanks a million for taking part in our being a guest on our podcast and being a brilliant guest. And best of luck with continued growth of your community and doing really fantastic work helping those who are obviously struggling with anxiety. So have a great afternoon. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much. Thank you both for inviting me on. And it's always great when we're talking about mental health, especially when it's three men in the room talking about it. I think that's wonderful.
That's a good spot indeed. That's a great way to end. Thanks a million and all the best.
All right. Look after yourself.